It was past midnight in a small, dimly lit restaurant at the edge of Lowe's Angels. The kind of place where the neon sign flickers more than it glows, and you can hear the kitchen fan humming like a tired old engine. At a corner table under a broken lamp that buzzed quietly sat a man everyone in that neighborhood knew but no one dared to greet, Marco DeLuca. They called him Il Lupo, the wolf. He had that cold stillness in his eyes, the kind that made waiters forget how to breathe when they approached his table. But tonight, something in his face was different, tighter, darker, like a storm he'd been holding back for years was finally breaking. Across from him sat a young man, barely in his 20s, shoulders hunched, hands shaking. His name was Louis. He wore a cheap jacket that didn't fit right and shoes that had seen too many extra shifts. He kept staring down at the table, trying hard not to meet Marco's eyes. On the surface, it looked like a simple late-night meeting between a boss and a terrified employee. But under that table, Louis's legs were trembling so hard the salt shaker was slightly vibrating each time his knee hit the wood. He knew what these meetings usually meant. You don't get called in after midnight by a man like Marco to talk about tomorrow's schedule. The restaurant was almost empty. The owner had locked the front door but left the sign on open. Everyone in the neighborhood knew that when Marco was inside, the place belonged to him. In the far corner near the window sat just one other customer. A man in a simple black jacket, baseball cap low over his face, shoulders relaxed in a way that seemed oddly peaceful for that hour. No security, no entourage, no loud demands, just a plate of half-eaten pasta and a glass of water. The waiters had given him a polite smile when he walked in, but no one really paid attention. In this city, people who wanted to be seen made sure they were seen. This guy was the opposite, invisible by choice. Marco lit a cigarette with slow, deliberate movements, his gold ring catching the faint light as he brought the flame to the tip. He didn't even look at Louis when he spoke. He stared straight ahead at some invisible point beyond the boy's shoulder. "You think I'm stupid, Chico?" he asked softly, his voice calm in that terrifying way that said the danger was real, but the decision had already been made. Louis swallowed hard, his mouth dry. "And no, sir, I swear I didn't." "You lost $20,000 of my money," Marco interrupted, still so quiet it was almost worse than if he'd shouted. "You had one job, just one, drive, deliver, come back." His eyes finally met Louis's, and in that stare there was no space to hide. "So now you tell me, where is my money?" The truth was simple and stupid and heartbreaking. Louis's little sister needed surgery back home in Mexico. A hospital that wouldn't wait, a family that had already sold everything they owned, a mother who cried on the phone every night. When the money had passed through his hands, when the envelope had felt heavy and dangerous, there had been a moment, a single breath, when he thought, I could save her. One wrong decision born from pure love, one act of desperation that in his heart felt right. And in Marco's world was unforgivable. He had sent the money to his family 2 weeks ago. His sister was alive because of it. And now, sitting across from the Mafia boss, he was sure he would not be. Louis tried to explain, words crashing into each other in a flood of fear and guilt. "Mi hermana, she was dying, senor. The doctors, they said if we don't pay, they won't operate. My mother, she was begging. I thought I could fix it later, I swear. I just needed time. Please, I'll work it off. I'll do anything." His voice broke halfway through, the shame burning his cheeks. For a second, a very small second, something flickered in Marco's eyes. An old memory, maybe, of when he had once been young and powerless too. But the flicker vanished almost immediately, replaced by the old, hard stone. "You stole from me," Marco said. "You used my money to play hero for your family." He leaned forward just an inch, enough for Louis to smell the smoke on his breath. "And now people on the street, they see that. They think I'm weak. They think anyone can take from me and cry a sad story and walk away." His jaw tightened. "That I cannot allow." In the corner, the man in the black jacket raised his head just a little. The cap still covered half his face, but his eyes had sharpened. He had been pretending not to listen, focusing on his plate, on the sound of the kitchen, the clink of glasses behind the bar. But certain words cut through everything. Stole, money, cannot allow. His instincts, trained not by a lifetime of crime, but by a lifetime of watching, listening, quietly caring, began to hum. This wasn't a simple argument. There was something darker brewing at that corner table. The owner of the restaurant, an older man with gray at his temples, hovered near the kitchen doorway, wiping a clean glass that didn't need wiping. He'd seen Marco angry before. But tonight, the boss's silence felt more dangerous than his shouting ever had. He caught a glimpse of the young man's trembling hands and looked quickly away, guilt pressing into his chest. He had a daughter Louis's age. In another world, maybe they would have been friends. In this one, he could barely bring himself to look at the boy who might not walk out of his restaurant alive. Marco placed his cigarette carefully in the ashtray, the gesture precise, almost gentle. His voice dropped lower. "Look at me, Louis." The young man forced himself to raise his eyes. "I gave you a chance when nobody else would touch you. I put you in a car, put money in your pocket, and you pay me back by making me look foolish." His fingers tapped the table once, twice. "I built my life on one rule: respect. People don't have to like me, they don't even have to understand me. But they must respect me. Do you understand what happens if I let you walk away after what you did?" Tears were already forming in Louis's eyes, but he blinked them back with everything he had. There was still pride in him, still a piece of dignity he was desperate to protect. "I understand, sir," he whispered, "but I couldn't let her die. I wouldn't. If you have to do something, then do it to me. Leave my family alone. They don't know anything. This is on me." It was a pathetic kind of courage, maybe, but it was real. He straightened his back a little, accepted the terror that rolled through his body like cold water. He thought, if this is the cost, then I pay it. For my sister, I pay it. For the first time that night, the man in the black jacket fully turned his head toward them. The angle of his jaw became clear. The side profile, the calm focus. It was the kind of face almost everyone on this planet had seen on a screen, running into gunfire or walking away from explosions, always with that same quiet gravity. But in the dim light of that little restaurant, there was no stage, no cameras, no red carpet. Just a man who had come in alone to eat his dinner, hoping for an ordinary night. His real name was Keanu Reeves. He watched the scene with a strange, unsettled feeling. He had grown up around chaos, around pain that left long shadows. He'd lost people he loved, seen how violence never truly ended, only changed hands. Sitting there, listening to the frightened confession of a young man who stole to save his sister, he felt a familiar ache. The world, in its cruelest moments, always seemed to force good hearts into impossible choices. And men like Marco, men who confused fear with respect, made those choices cost blood. Keanu didn't know these people. He didn't know the details, the history, the streets they walked every day. And yet there was something he recognized. The way Louis's voice shook but did not completely collapse, the way Marco hid his pain behind cold control, the way the restaurant owner hovered at a distance, desperate but afraid. This was not a movie. There was no director to yell "cut" if things went too far. This was one of those quiet little crossroads moments that normally passed unseen by the wider world. One choice here, one word there, and a life could end or somehow be saved. Marco's hand slid slowly into his jacket, and the air in the room tightened like a pulled wire. The owner's breath caught in his throat. Louis's fingers clenched around the edge of the table, knuckles white. The waiters disappeared into the kitchen, pretending they had suddenly remembered urgent tasks. Even the buzzing lamp above them seemed louder. Keanu watched, eyes narrowing, body very still. He had seen that movement before too many times on screens and in shadows. He knew what usually came next. Without raising his voice, Marco spoke almost gently, and that softness was more chilling than a scream. "You want to be a hero for your family, Louis? Heroes pay a high price." His hand paused inside his jacket, his decision balanced on a single breath. "Tonight, you pay yours." And just as his fingers closed around something unseen, as the moment hung frozen in terrible possibility, the chair in the far corner scraped against the floor. The quiet stranger in the black jacket slowly stood up, turned fully toward them, and began to walk across the restaurant. Leaving everyone in that room, even Marco, wondering who he really was and what he was about to do. Louis heard the footsteps before he saw the man. Slow, steady, almost gentle against the worn wooden floor. For a heartbeat, he thought it was just a waiter or the owner coming to beg for mercy he knew he wouldn't get. But when he turned his head, when he saw the man in the black jacket walking toward their table, everything inside him stuttered. Not because of fear, because of something stranger, something almost unreal. The cap was off now, dark hair a few strands falling over his forehead, a tired face with lines that came from living, not from vanity, and those eyes, quiet, kind, carrying a sadness that didn't try to hide. Lewis had seen that face 100 times before, though never this close, never without a screen between them. His brain took a second to catch up, to fit the pieces together. Keanu Reeves, John Wick, Neo. The guy his little sister used to watch on the tiny TV in their village, whispering, Myra hermano, algun dia tu también vas a ser fuerte. For a moment, Lewis thought he was hallucinating from fear. What was a Hollywood star doing in this hole-in-the-wall restaurant in the middle of the night, inside a world that didn't know cameras, didn't care about fame? But the soft creak of the floor beneath Keanu's boots, the careful way he moved, the way he glanced at Lewis with real concern, it was all painfully, sharply real. Marco's hand froze halfway inside his jacket as Keanu approached. The boss turned, slow and deliberate, his eyes narrowing in irritation first, then flickering with recognition. He had seen the movies too, of course. His men had joked about it sometimes. Hey, boss, two airs como John Wick no, nady ti toka. But this wasn't a movie set. This was his table, his rule, his world. And someone was walking straight into it without being invited. Keanu stopped a respectful distance from them, not too close, not too far. His posture was relaxed, hands visible, no threat in his body language. Still, the energy in the room shifted. The owner straightened unconsciously. One of the waiters peeked out from the kitchen, eyes wide. The neon sign outside cast a faint red glow on Keanu's face, making the scene look almost unreal, like two separate worlds had suddenly collided in this one fragile moment. I'm sorry to interrupt, Keanu said softly, his voice low but clear. He spoke like he was stepping into a conversation he knew he had no right to own, only to gently touch. But I couldn't help overhearing. His gaze slid briefly to Lewis, then back to Marco. This sounds serious. Marco's jaw tightened. This doesn't concern you, he replied, his tone flat, but the controlled kind of flat that hid an edge. His fingers remained inside his jacket, brushing against cold metal, testing how far this stranger would go. You should finish your dinner and leave. This is private. Keanu nodded slightly, not arguing, not challenging. I understand, he said, and I'll go. I don't need to be here. His eyes softened, and there was something in them that didn't match the world of guns and debts and blood. But I heard the boy, about his sister, about the money, and I've seen enough in my life to know how nights like this end. His voice got even quieter. They end badly, for everyone, even for the people who think they're in control. Lewis's heart pounded louder with every word. He wanted to tell him to run, to sit back down, to stay out of this. This wasn't a movie where the hero always finds a way. This was Marco's territory. Here, good men were just targets wearing better clothes, but his voice wouldn't come out. All he could do was stare, caught between amazement and raw terror. Marco leaned back in his chair, studying Keanu with cold curiosity. You think you know my business because you make little action movies? He asked, a faint, dangerous smile tugging at his lips. You come here alone, you eat, you listen, and now you want to play savior. He shook his head slowly. This is not Hollywood, Senor Reeves. The way he said the name, half mocking, half impressed that this man would dare walk over at all, made the room feel even smaller. Keanu took the hit calmly. He didn't flinch, didn't let his ego answer for him. He just breathed in once, steady. You're right, he said. This isn't Hollywood. That's why I'm here talking to you like a man, not performing for anyone. No cameras, no scripts, just people. He glanced at the owner, then at Lewis, then back at Marco. You, him, me, all human. All carrying things nobody else sees. Silence stretched between them. The restaurant fan hummed. Somewhere outside, a siren wailed and faded away. For the first time since the meeting started, Marco removed his hand from his jacket, placing it deliberately on the table. He interlaced his fingers, making a show of his control, of the fact that whatever he did next would be by choice, not because he was intimidated by some actor. You don't know what this boy did, Marco said. He stole from me. He made me look weak. In my world, that has a price. If I don't collect, I lose everything I built. His eyes hardened, but behind that hardness was something heavier, years of climbing through dirt and blood, of becoming the man people feared just so he would never have to be the one afraid again. You think one speech about being human changes that? Keanu listened, really listened, as if each word mattered. That was the strange thing about him. Even standing in front of a man who could have him shot just for interference, there was no arrogance, no lecturing tone, just attention. I don't know your whole story, Keanu admitted. I don't know what you've had to do to survive, but I know this. Respect built on fear never really lasts. It just passes the fear around like a disease. Oz choosing his words carefully. I grew up around chaos. I lost friends to violence. I know what it does. People like us. He stopped himself, corrected gently. People like me, I mean, we make those movies because it gives people the illusion that in the end, justice comes, the good guy wins, the bad guys pay. But life, it's messier. Sometimes good people do desperate things. Sometimes the bad guy was a scared kid once, too. His eyes held Marco's without aggression. You have a choice tonight. You can be the man everyone expects you to be, or you can be something different, something bigger. Louis swallowed hard, his throat burning. He had never heard anyone talk to Marco like that, not with defiance, but with a strange, stubborn respect. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't bravado. It was courage, but quiet. The kind of courage that doesn't need to shout to exist. Marco scoffed lightly. Bigger? You think letting this boy live makes me bigger? His gaze cut to Louis, full of simmering anger. He knew the rules. He broke them. If I show him mercy, I lose power. People stop fearing me. Then what? You leave, go back to your safe world, and I stay here cleaning up the mess. Keanu nodded again, accepting the logic without agreeing with it. Maybe some will think you're weak, he said. But some will see something else. They'll see a man who remembers he still has a heart. That makes people loyal in a different way. He reached slowly for his wallet, making sure his hands were visible the whole time, his movements exaggeratedly peaceful. He took out a black card, then a folded stack of cash from another pocket, set both gently on the edge of the table. I can't pay back your whole loss, he said. Not like this, not instantly, but I can start, and I can finish, every cent, quietly. No one needs to know except us. You get your money, your respect stays intact. The boy lives and works wherever he needs to, far away from your business. He becomes nobody to your people, just a face they saw once, a ghost. You don't lose anything, you just change the story. The owner's breath hitched. $20,000 wasn't small change, even for a movie star, but it wasn't about the amount. It was about what it meant. A stranger offering to shoulder the weight of another man's mistake, not for glory, not for a headline, but because somewhere inside he couldn't bear to walk out and pretend he hadn't heard a family breaking over the phone line to Mexico. Louis stared at the money and the card as if it were something sacred and dangerous at the same time. Shame washed over him in a crushing wave. He had already stolen once to save his sister. Now someone who didn't even know his name was trying to save him from the price of that decision. It clawed at his pride. It softened something in him so fast he felt like crying right there. "Senor," he whispered, barely audible. I don't deserve." Keanu turned his head slightly toward him, his expression gentle but firm. "It's not about deserving," he said. "It's about what we do with the chances we get. If this works, you don't waste it. You understand?" There was no Hollywood speech in his tone, just a tired man asking another to be better if given the chance. Marco looked at the money, at the card, then back up at Keanu, and something like offense flashed in his eyes. Not because of the offer itself, but because of what it suggested, that his judgment could be bought, that his rules were negotiable. His fingers curled into a fist on the table. "You think I'm some charity case?" he said, voice dropping lower, more dangerous. "That you can walk in here, wave some money, and change the way I run my life?" His past rose up behind his words, long nights on street corners, men laughing in his face, doors slammed shut, his mother crying over empty cupboards. All the years he had built his power so no one would ever again look down on him or speak to him like he was less. The offer, even made respectfully, scraped against the old, raw wound of his pride. Keanu's eyes flickered with understanding. "No," he said quietly. "I think you're a man who's smart enough to know that bullets solve problems only for a little while, then they create bigger ones." He took a half-step closer, his voice barely more than a murmur now, meant more for Marco than for the room. "You're not small, I can see that. A small man would have already pulled the trigger. You're still thinking. That means you're still in control, of yourself, of your story, so I'm not buying your decision. I'm giving you an option. You can throw it away if you want. That's your power, not the gun." Those words hit something in Marco he hadn't expected. All his life, power had meant being the one who didn't hesitate, being the one people feared more than they questioned. But this stranger, this famous face who somehow carried himself with more humility than half the men Marco knew, was reframing everything in front of him. Saying the real power wasn't in violence, it was in choosing not to use it. Louis tried to read Marco's expression and failed. The boss's face was a war zone of emotions. Anger, old hurt, bruised ego, something like grudging respect, and underneath it all, a sadness he guarded so deeply even he had forgotten it was there. The owner's hands were shaking around the glass he still held. He wanted to speak up to support the voice of peace, but his fear glued his lips shut. "Let me ask you something," Keanu continued softly, careful not to push too hard, knowing how thin the ice was under their feet. "When you go home, when the night is over and the noise dies down, how quiet is it? When it's just you and your reflection?" His gaze didn't judge, it just saw. "Does it feel strong, or does it feel lonely?" The question cut deeper than any accusation could have. For a heartbeat, Marco's mask slipped. Behind the hard stare, something old and tired flashed, something achingly human. Countless nights sitting alone in big, silent rooms, expensive whiskey, cheap sleep, men outside the door with guns, but no one he trusted enough to turn his back on fully. Respect, yes. Fear, absolutely. But love didn't survive long in his line of work. He had taught himself not to need it. He forced the crack in his armor closed, his voice turning colder. "You don't know me," he said. "You don't know what it took to get here." "You're right," Keanu said. "I don't, but I know what it costs to stay here if you don't change something." He nodded toward Lewis. "You kill him, maybe your people fear you more tomorrow, but a story like this, it doesn't disappear, it grows in their heads. The boss kills even the ones who were just trying to save their families. They obey, but they never truly stand beside you. They stand behind you, waiting. That's not strength. That's a ticking clock." Marco stared at him, breathing a little heavier now, torn between the old script of his life and this strange, new possibility laid on the table like the money and the card. Mercy without humiliation. Power without blood. It felt dangerous in a way violence never had because it required him to be vulnerable, to trust that his world wouldn't crumble if he did something different, just once. "Even if I say yes," Marco said slowly, "how do I know he doesn't do it again? That someone else doesn't try the same thing next week? Cry about a sick mother, a dying child, thinking I'll spare them too." Keanu looked at Lewis then, really looked at him, at the raw fear and guilt twisting inside the young man's chest. "Because he knows what it feels like to almost die for one choice," Keanu said. "And because I'll make sure he never has to be near your world again. He disappears from your streets, that's my word." The words slipped out of him before he could fully consider what they meant. It was a promise that would pull him into this story much deeper than just a passing stranger. A promise that would make Lewis's survival not just an option, but a responsibility he was accepting onto his own shoulders. Marco noticed that too. His eyes narrowed again, curious now in a different way. "Your word," he repeated. "So now you're responsible for him, for what he does after tonight?" He leaned forward slightly, sensing the weight of that commitment. Careful, actor, men who take on other people's debts, they drown in them. The truth of that hit Keanu like a subtle blow, all the people he'd tried to help before, all the times he couldn't. The funerals, the quiet nights. But still, he nodded, the resolve in his eyes steady. "Maybe," he said, "but I'd rather drown trying to pull someone out than stand on the shore watching them go under." The sentence hung there, raw and unpolished, but it carried a weight that pressed into every corner of the room. Lewis felt his eyes burn. The owner's throat tightened. Even one of the waiters in the kitchen, just barely hearing the words through the door, felt something shift in his chest. For the first time that night, Marco didn't have an immediate response. His stare moved from Keanu to Lewis. The boy's face was wet now, tears he no longer tried to hide tracing lines down his cheeks. But there was something new in his posture, a fragile, trembling hope mixed with his fear, a hope that felt dangerous to hold. Marco's jaw clenched as he looked at this kid, poor clothes, shaking hands, eyes full of desperate love for a sister he'd been willing to die for. In that reflection, buried under decades of choices, he saw a faint echo of someone he used to be. A boy who had once stolen food so his mother wouldn't starve, who'd gotten beaten half to death for it, and had promised himself that one day no one would ever lay a hand on him again. Slowly, Marco exhaled. The sound was almost like a sigh, but heavier, as if he were letting go of something he'd carried for too long. He looked down at the money on the table, the sleek black card, the fragile, flickering possibility of a different ending. His fingers twitched once, then twice. The entire room held its breath. Then very quietly, Marco said, "You really think you can carry his debt? That you can protect him from men like me?" Keanu didn't hesitate this time. "I don't think I can protect him from the whole world," he said. But I can protect him from this moment, from you, tonight, and I can help him find a place where he won't have to make choices like this again." Marco's stare dug into him, searching for weakness, for a lie, for any sign that this was just another performance. But all he saw was a tired truth. A man who had nothing to gain, everything to risk, and still chose to stand there. The boss leaned back, the chair creaking softly under his weight. One of his hands drifted back toward his jacket, hovering right above where the gun waited. Lewis's lungs seized. Keanu's muscles tensed almost imperceptibly, ready to move, though he knew how little his body would matter against a bullet. Another second passed, then another. Finally, Marco's fingers dipped into his jacket. And this time, when he pulled his hand out, what he placed on the table was not a gun, but something small, metal, and unexpected. A worn silver pendant on a thin chain, its surface scratched by years of use. He stared at it for a long moment, lost in some memory only he could see. Then, without looking up, he said in a low, unreadable voice, "You want to save him." His eyes slowly rose to meet Keanu's, something dark and unresolved burning in them. "Fine, but there's a condition, one that will cost you more than money and more than courage." And as those words left his lips, the air in the restaurant shifted again, because everyone could feel it. Whatever Marco was about to demand would change not just Lewis's life, but Keanu's, in a way none of them were ready for. For a moment, no one spoke. The air felt heavy, like the whole room was leaning in to hear what would come next. The small silver pendant sat between them on the table, catching the weak light from the buzzing lamp above. It looked out of place in Marco's world of leather, smoke, and threats, too fragile, too personal, like something from another lifetime. Keanu glanced at it, then at Marco's face. "What's the condition?" he asked quietly. Marco didn't answer right away. His thumb brushed lightly over the pendant, tracing the worn edges. He looked like a man standing at the edge of a memory he'd tried hard to bury, suddenly forced to stare down into it again. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost some of its hard polish. It was rougher now, older. "This," he said, tapping the pendant with his nail, "belonged to my brother." The owner of the restaurant shifted uncomfortably. He had heard whispers, old stories nobody dared repeat out loud anymore. About how there had once been two DeLuca brothers, not one. About how one had disappeared and the other had come back colder, meaner, convinced that the only way to survive was to be feared more than anyone. Marco's gaze drifted somewhere far beyond the walls. "We grew up poor, worse than poor. We had nothing. My brother, he was like this kid." His chin jerked toward Lewis. "Always believing in people, always thinking love was enough. He used to say, 'One day we're gonna get out. We'll have a little house. No more running, no more lying.'" A humorless half-smile crossed his face. "I told him the world doesn't work like that. He didn't listen." He closed his hand around the pendant for a second, knuckles whitening, then forced his fingers to open again. "When I started in this life, he hated it, said I was becoming the same kind of man who hurt us, but he stayed close anyway to remind me who I really was." The bitterness in his tone wrapped itself around the words like smoke. "One night I made a deal, a big one, dangerous. He begged me to walk away. I didn't. Things went bad. There were guns, screaming. He stepped in front of me." Marco's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking. "They were aiming at me. He took the bullets instead." The room was so quiet you could hear the faint click of ice settling in a glass behind the bar. Lewis's eyes widened. For the first time, he saw Marco not as a monster, but as a man built on top of broken pieces he never got to heal. "I held him while he died," Marco continued, voice lower now. "He pressed this into my hand, said, 'Don't let this life take your heart, hermano. It's all you really have.'" He shook his head. "I didn't listen to him then either. I threw myself deeper into this world, became the man you see now, strong, they say, respected, feared." He looked around the empty restaurant, at the frightened faces peeking from the kitchen door, at the owner standing a little too far away. "But I haven't had one real conversation in years that wasn't about power or money or control." His eyes locked back on Keanu. "And now you walk in with your tired face and your soft voice telling me I still have a choice, that I can be bigger than this. You sound exactly like he did." There was no flattery in his tone, only a pained, reluctant honesty. "It makes me angry, because a part of me knows he was right, and I buried that part a long time ago so I could survive." Keanu listened without interrupting, his expression open. carrying a quiet sorrow that needed no words. He knew something about grief that never quite left, about ghosts that stayed sitting at your table long after the world moved on. "So here is my condition," Marco said finally. He pushed the pendant a little closer to the center of the table between them. "You want me to spare this boy's life, to let him walk out of here to call off any men who might come looking?" His stare was sharp again, but underneath something else was moving. "Then you don't just pay his debt with money, you pay it with your presence." Keanu's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Marco said slowly, "you come back here to this place to me once a week, alone, no cameras, no security, no press. You sit at that table." He gestured toward the one Keanu had been eating at, "and you talk. About whatever you want. Or you say nothing, I don't care, but you show up for a year." The owner blinked, completely thrown. Lewis stared as if he hadn't heard correctly. Even Keanu needed a few seconds to process it. "You want me to visit you?" he asked, not mocking, just stunned by the simplicity and strangeness of the demand. Marco nodded once. "You come here as a man, not as John Wick, not as Neo, just you. You sit with me. You remind me that someone in this world still looks at me like I'm human, even if I don't deserve it." He swallowed, the movement tight. "You keep that part alive, the part my brother died trying to protect. In exchange, I let this kid live. I let him disappear. And I give you my word, anyone who tries to touch him answers to me." Lewis's mouth fell open. Of all the prices he expected to be tied to his life, a job, a cut of his soul, a future in chains, this was nothing like it. This was almost impossible to comprehend. A mafia boss asking for conversations instead of blood. Keanu looked at Marco for a long, searching moment. "Why me?" he asked finally. "You could ask any priest, any therapist, any—" "Because they come with judgment," Marco cut in. "With plans, with systems." He narrowed his eyes slightly, not in anger, but in measurement. "You walked over here tonight knowing I might kill you for it, but you didn't come to preach, you didn't come to prove anything. You came because you heard pain and couldn't ignore it. A man like that sits down, talks, listens, goes home, and doesn't write a report about it." He shrugged one shoulder, the gesture carrying a rough kind of vulnerability. "Besides, you already live with ghosts, I can see it. Men who carry their own ghosts don't run so quickly from someone else's." The words sank into Keanu with a strange, quiet impact. He thought of long nights alone in hotel rooms, cities blending together, fans screaming his name while he went back to empty hallways. He thought of the people he'd lost, of how often he'd wished there was someone who could sit with the weight in his chest without trying to fix it, just sharing the silence so it didn't feel so large. To show up once a week. To be human with a man everyone else feared. To give him, in some small way, what no one had been able to give his brother in time. Proof that kindness could exist even in the darkest corners. "It's not an easy price," Marco added, almost defensively, as if worried it sounded too soft. "You will have to lie to people, to your team, your friends. Explain why you disappear every Thursday night. People will ask questions, they'll think you're crazy. You will carry my secret whether you like it or not. That is not nothing." Keanu let out a slow breath, feeling the truth in those words. This would not be a simple favor. It would tie his life, quietly and dangerously, to a man most of the world would say he should never be near. It would mean stepping into a gray space where the lines between victim and villain blurred. He could walk away, he knew that. He could tell himself this wasn't his responsibility, that he had done more than most already. He could let the old story play out. A desperate boy, a ruthless boss, a tragic ending no one would ever hear about. The world would keep spinning. Movies would keep filming. His career would stay clean. But then he looked at Lewis. The young man's shoulders were shaking now, not from fear, but from the unbearable tension of hope. His eyes were fixed on Keanu's face like a man watching the last bridge either hold or collapse. Somewhere far away, in a village with weak electricity and strong faith, a little sister was sleeping in a hospital bed, alive because her brother had stolen for her. She had no idea that her life and her brother's hung in the space between two men in a half-empty restaurant. Then he looked at Marco. For the first time, Keanu truly saw the loneliness in him. Not the performance of power, not the armor of gold rings and sharp eyes, but the crack underneath. A man building empires just to fill a house that echoed when he walked through it. A man who had lost the only person who saw him without fear and had never forgiven himself or the world for it. Keanu felt the answer rising in him, not from duty, not from ego, but from that quiet part of his soul that still believed, despite everything, that small, stubborn kindnesses could change the shape of a life. "All right," he said softly. "Once a week for a year I come here, I sit, I talk, or we say nothing, whatever you need." He paused. "On one condition of my own." Marco's eyes narrowed again. "You're in no position to make conditions," he started, but there was no real bite to it. Curiosity was winning over anger now. "I think I am," Keanu said, still calm. "Because what you're asking from me, it's not small. It touches my life, my work, my safety. I accept that, but I need something in return." He nodded once toward Lewis. "When I walk out of here with him tonight, that's it. It's over. No man follows us. No one makes a call by mistake." You cut the thread completely. "If anyone disobeys you, they answer to you, not me, not him, you, and you protect his family. They never even hear your name." The words were quiet, but they carried a spine of steel. There was kindness in Keanu's face, but now there was also a clear boundary, a line he wouldn't let even this man cross if he could help it. Marco stared at him, weighing the terms. It was strange. This was not a negotiation like the ones he was used to. No threats, no shouting, no bargaining over percentages. Just two men, each holding a piece of the other's future, trying to decide if trust was possible between them. Slowly, Marco nodded. "Agreed," he said. "No one touches him, no one touches his family, they become invisible." He exhaled as if signing an invisible contract. "And you come back every week, you miss one visit, the deal is broken." The thought of being bound to a man like this would terrify most people. But somehow, in that moment, what Keanu felt most was responsibility. A heavy, sober sense that he was stepping into something far larger than just one conversation. "I won't miss," he said. A strange, almost disbelieving silence fell between them, the kind that comes right after a decision that cannot be undone. Then Marco picked up the pendant with surprising gentleness and held it out to Keanu. "Take it," he said. Keanu blinked. "That's your brother S." Marco nodded once. "Now it represents this promise between us. You keep it. You bring it every time you come here. You put it on the table so I know you didn't send some body double or some actor playing a role. It's you. Always you." His eyes darkened slightly. "You lose it, that's your warning from the universe. Means you're slipping. Means you're not taking this seriously, and I don't make second deals." The pendant was small, cool against Keanu's palm as he accepted it. For a second he felt the weight of another man's past settle into his hand. A life saved, a life lost, a brother's last wish bending the present toward something kinder. He closed his fingers around it, not with ownership, but with respect. Lewis let out a sound he didn't even know he'd been holding back, half sob, half exhale. His whole body seemed to sag, the invisible noose around his neck finally loosening. Tears streamed openly down his face now, but there was a new light in his eyes, disbelief that had begun to turn into gratitude. Marco turned to him, his expression sharpening again, though the hatred had drained out of it, replaced by something stern and almost protective. "Listen to me, Lewis," he said. "I'm only going to say this once. You're done here, you don't come back to this neighborhood. Not for work, not to say thank you, not for anything. You vanish. New job, new streets, new life. You hear my name again, you turn the other way. You don't ever put this man," he nodded at Keanu, "in a position where he has to pay for your mistakes twice. You understand?" Lewis nodded so fast it almost looked painful. Senor, I understand. I swear I'll go, I'll disappear, I'll work, I won't waste this." His voice cracked, the weight of the second chance pressing into every syllable. "Gracias, de verdad, gracias." Marco's expression stayed hard, but his eyes softened just a fraction, so small only someone really looking would see it. "Don't thank me," he muttered. "Thank the crazy actor who walked into the wolf's mouth because he thought he could tame it with conversation." A faint, unexpected smile tugged at the corner of Keanu's lips. It wasn't joy exactly, but a small acknowledgement of the absurdity and beauty of the moment. "Wolves remember kindness longer than people think," he said quietly. "Sometimes it just takes them a while to figure out what to do with it." Marco gave him a look that said, "Don't push it," but there was no real anger behind it. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers once. The sound echoed sharply. From the kitchen doorway, one of his men appeared, a big guy with a shaved head and a tattoo crawling up his neck. He'd been waiting for a signal all night, ready for the usual outcome. But what he saw instead confused him. No blood, no screaming, just his boss sitting across from a famous movie star, a strange, heavy calm hanging in the air. "Take the closed sign out," Marco said. "We're done here." Then, after a beat, he added, "And tell the others to go home. There's nothing to see tonight." The man frowned slightly but didn't argue. "You got it, boss." He disappeared again, footsteps fading. Marco stood up slowly. The chair scraped against the floor with a low, final sound. For the first time since Keanu had approached, they were standing at almost the same height, eye to eye. There was no handshake, no forced show of respect, just a nod, small but real. "You walk him out," Marco said, jerking his head toward Lewis. "Use the back door if you want. No one will follow. Starting tomorrow, he's dead to this place, in the good way." He gave Lewis one last hard look. "Make it worth it." Lewis could only nod, still too overwhelmed to form proper words. Marco took a step back, then paused. "Next Thursday," he said to Keanu, his voice low but certain. "Same time, same table, don't be late." "I won't," Keanu replied. Marco turned and walked toward the front of the restaurant, his shoulders still broad, his presence still heavy, but something about the way he moved had changed. Just a little. As if a weight he'd carried alone for years had shifted an inch, shared now with someone else. When he disappeared through the door to the alley outside, the restaurant seemed to exhale all at once. The owner dropped the glass he'd been wiping. It landed on the counter with a dull thud instead of breaking, but his hands were shaking so hard he had to grip the edge of the bar to steady himself. One of the waiters burst into tears in the kitchen, the tension breaking his composure. Someone laughed in a thin, hysterical way, the kind of laugh that comes when you realize you're still alive after expecting not to be. Keanu turned to Lewis. Up close, the boy looked even younger, cheeks wet, lips trembling, eyes swollen and red. "Can you stand?" Keanu asked. Lewis nodded, though his legs wobbled as he pushed himself up from the chair. For a second, he swayed. Keanu reached out and placed a steadying hand on his arm, the touch light but solid. It grounded him. "Come on," Keanu said. "Let's get you out of here." They walked toward the back exit, passing by the owner. The older man stepped forward, eyes shining with gratitude he didn't trust himself to put into words. "Senor Reeves," he managed, voice thick. I don't know how to." "You don't have to," Keanu cut in gently. "Just take care of this place, take care of your people, that's enough." The owner nodded quickly, tears dangerously close. "We will," he whispered. "We will." In the narrow back alley, the night air felt cold and clean after the smoky warmth of the restaurant. The city hummed around them, distant traffic, a dog barking somewhere far away, the faint buzz of a streetlight. It felt like stepping out of one reality into another, as if what had just happened inside might dissolve into some strange dream if they didn't hold on to it. Lewis leaned against the brick wall for a moment, trying to catch his breath. "Senor Keanu." He stumbled over the name, still not quite believing he was saying it to the real man in front of him. How do I thank you? You don't even know me." Keanu shook his head softly. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "Just use this. Don't come back to this life. Don't make the same choice twice. Promise me that." Lewis swallowed hard and nodded. "Lo prometo," he whispered. "I promise I'll find another job. I'll send money the right way. I'll be better." Keanu studied his face for a second, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded scrap of paper and a pen. He wrote quickly, then handed it to Lewis. "There's a number on there," he said. "It's not mine directly, but it's someone I trust. You call them tomorrow. Tell them I sent you. They'll help you find something honest. Not glamorous, not easy, but safe." Lewis stared at the paper like it was a second lifeline. "Why?" he asked, the word barely audible. "Why do you care this much? You could have just walked away." Keanu looked down the alley for a second, watching the play of light and shadow on the pavement. "Because," he said slowly, "a long time ago I wished someone would do the same for people I loved. Not everyone got saved, not everyone got a second chance, but when I see one standing in front of me, I can't pretend it's not there." He met Lewis's eyes again. "You're not a mistake, you're just a man who made one. There's a difference." The words landed deep, healing something in Lewis he hadn't even known was broken. For the first time since this nightmare began, he didn't feel like a criminal who had escaped by luck. He felt like a human being standing at a crossroads, with one path closing behind him and another opening ahead. "Vite," Keanu said softly. "Go, tonight, don't wait." Lewis nodded, clutching the paper like a treasure. "Someday," he said, voice shaking but certain, "I'll make enough to help someone else, like you helped me, I swear." Keanu gave him a small, tired smile. "That's how the world changes," he said. "One person at a time doing what they can." He stepped back. "Now go, before he changes his mind." Lewis managed a wet, shaky laugh at that, then took a deep breath and started down the alley, looking back once, then twice, as if making sure this wasn't some cruel trick of imagination. Keanu raised a hand in a small wave. Lewis mirrored it, then turned the corner and disappeared into the night, toward his sister, his family, a new life that hadn't existed an hour ago. For a moment, Keanu stood alone in the alley, the city pressing in around him. He opened his hand and looked down at the pendant lying in his palm. The metal felt warm now from his skin. He turned it over with his thumb, imagining the brother who had worn it, the promises it had heard, the blood it had seen. A year, he thought, once a week. 12 months of walking into the lion's den just to sit and talk to a man built from hurt. It sounded heavy, maybe even foolish. But as he closed his fingers around the pendant again, he didn't feel regret. He felt purpose. Something soft shifted inside him, a realization that this wasn't just about Lewis, or even about Marco. It was about him too. About the parts of himself that were tired of pretending he was just a face on a screen living out scripted bravery while real people bled in the shadows. He walked back around to the front of the restaurant. The open sign had been flipped to closed now. The neon buzzed dully, painting the sidewalk in red and blue. Through the window, he saw Marco sitting alone at the corner table, the one Lewis had occupied earlier. No men, no noise, just him and his thoughts. Their eyes met through the glass. For a second, neither moved. Then Marco nodded once, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't a threat this time. It was acknowledgement of something fragile and strange that had begun between them. Not friendship, not yet, maybe not ever, but a shared understanding that would pull both their lives slightly off the tracks they'd been set on. Keanu nodded back, then turned and walked away into the night, the pendant resting, small and steady, in his pocket. In the months that followed, the story of what happened that night never made the news. No viral videos, no headlines. Just a quiet rumor in one neighborhood that the wolf had softened somehow, that he had started spending one evening a week at a back table, talking softly to a man in a black jacket. The waiters noticed small changes, less shouting, more listening. The owner noticed that sometimes, late at night, Marco laughed, really laughed, at something the quiet stranger said. It sounded rusty, like a door not opened in years, but it was real. Some nights they talked about movies, about stunts gone wrong, about the absurdity of pretending to be invincible when you spent most of your life feeling breakable. Other nights, they talked about childhood, about brothers and mothers, and the cities that shaped them. Some nights, they barely talked at all, just sat in companionable silence. Two men who had seen very different sides of the world sharing one small corner of it together. And somewhere far away, in a small town across the border, a young girl recovered fully from her surgery. Her brother found work cleaning cars, then as a mechanic's assistant. Hard work, dirty work, honest work. Whenever he felt tempted to cut a corner, to take an easy wrong instead of a hard right, he would remember a man who had stepped between him and a bullet, offering nothing but kindness and a dangerous promise. Years later, when people asked Lewis why he never got involved with those kinds of men again, he would just shake his head and say, "Because someone paid my debt with their heart instead of with blood. You don't dishonor a gift like that." As for Marco, no one knew exactly when it happened, but at some point the way his men spoke about him changed. There was still fear, yes, old habits die slow, but there was something else threaded through their words now. A strange, wary respect, not just for his power, but for the fact that he had started to choose restraint where others would have chosen violence. Stories began to drift through the streets, of a debt forgiven here, a punishment softened there. Not always, not perfectly. But more than before. They didn't know why. They didn't know about the pendant that lay on the table between him and Keanu every Thursday night. a small circle of silver that held a dead brother's last wish and a living promise being kept. They didn't know that once, a long time ago, a mafia boss had raised his hand to end a trembling boy's life. And a quiet man with kind eyes had decided that his courage would not just exist in movies, but in the messy, dangerous reality of a half-empty restaurant, changing 3 lives at once, simply because he chose, in that moment, not to look away. And that, in the end, was the true heart of it. Kindness given at the edge of fear. Courage shown in conversation instead of violence. Humility in a man who never said, "Look what I did," only, "This is what we can do." Resilience in souls who dared to believe that even the hardest stories could be rewritten, one brave decision at a time.